Thank you very much, Brigitte. It's good to be here again. So schön ist hier noch einmal zu sein. There we are. I'm going to speak a little bit of German today. I'm going to put myself out of my comfort zone because the topic is mixed language storytelling. Now, I'm guessing that all of you or most of you speak German, and I'm guessing that most, and if not all of you, teach English. If there's anybody in the room who isn't a German user or doesn't teach English, that's fine. This is applicable in many contexts, but please let me know in the chat. And maybe you teach other languages apart from English or as well as English. And if you do, please just write that in the chat as well, what other languages you use or you teach. So we're going to have some different languages in this session. I'm going to begin with a very simple idea. I'm going to tell you something in German first, and then I'm going to tell it to you in Spanish. And some of you might be, you might have some Spanish. Some of you might be a high-level user of Spanish. Some of you might be beginners. And I think in any case, that's fine, because you will all understand something. And I'll be interested to know what you do understand. So let's have it first in German. And I'm going to ask you afterwards, who, where, what about, and when. Who, where, what about, and when. Remember that. Okay, here we go. Oh, was für ein Sturm, Mom. Oh, so viel Wasser auf der Straße. Wir können nicht weiter gehen. Es ist wie ein Schwimmbad. So viel Regen. Oh. Was werden wir machen? Wir müssen in 5 Minuten im Krankenhaus sein. Wir warten. Mom, ja, wenn wir links gehen, dann über den Hügel, vielleicht kommen wir nicht zu spät im Krankenhaus, okay? Ahora en español. Vaya tormenta. Oh, Mom, cuánta agua. Es como una piscina. Tanta lluvia. Oh, ¿qué vamos a hacer? Hay que estar en 5 minutos en el hospital. Mom, vamos a la izquierda. Si vamos ahí, sobre la colina, podemos llegar quizás no demasiado tarde al hospital. Okay, so you've had the same story in German and the same story in Spanish. So if you are a high-level user of Spanish, maybe when you listen to me, you recognize some language, you thought it confirmed or validated some Spanish maybe you even noticed some errors in my Spanish because I'm not a brilliant user of Spanish, and even maybe you noticed my accent, of course, and maybe comment about that. If you have a basic knowledge of Spanish, perhaps there were 1 or 2 words that you understood and recognized, and maybe there were some words that you learned because you recognize them from the German and from the Spanish by recognizing gestures and the way I was using my body and voice. So could you just write down a couple of Spanish words that you recognized or that you learned? And don't worry about spelling. And if you have no Spanish at all, that was your first time listening to Spanish, maybe you could comment on the sound of Spanish. What did you enjoy about the rhythm, the cadence, the music of the Spanish language when you listened to me telling the same story? Well, thank you very much. So people are writing hospital. Maybe you recognized that word from English. Colina, piscina, izquierda, la colina. Lots of that you know Spanish already. Thank you very much. That's a very simple example of mixed language storytelling. Once upon a time. Please write once upon a time We're talking about storytelling today. And can you write it in the chat in another language? Maybe you could write it in English, maybe in German, or maybe in another language that you speak. Can we just have in the chat? You might need to use, you know, our alphabet, but please write in the chat, once upon a time. It's a great way into stories from different cultures. We've got Il était une fois from French. Thank you, Nina. We've got Mianese using Greek. That's more than I know. And thank you for finding the Greek alphabet. And Claudia Zizhan. What language is that, Claudia? What language? Can you tell us? And we've got en algún tiempo, or había una vez. Brilliant. We've got Spanish there. Oh, Claudia, that's Russian. Thank you so much for sharing the Russian once upon a time. I thought, is it Vili Billy, or is that another one you've got there? I'm afraid I don't read the Russian, the Cyrillic alphabet. Wonderful. So we've got some different languages coming into the room already. So Brigitte, could you open the PowerPoint for me and show the first slide? And from there, I'll be in charge of the PowerPoint. Mixed language storytelling offers language learners purposeful and intelligent ways of using what they already know, allowing them to focus on the content before they have to think about the form. This makes learning engaging and rewarding. In this practical webinar, we'll try out mixed language storytelling activities for classes where students share the same first language. So imagining, for example, for most of us, or for most of you, our learners mostly speak German to a greater or lesser extent. And as well as for plurilingual classes, where we can all learn by celebrating and esteeming students' diverse heritages and language identities. So I'm imagining that many of you are working in schools where not just German is spoken in the school's students' homes, but other languages as well. So students are coming to school knowing different languages because of their heritages, probably. So that's what we're looking at today. This colourful European English wildflower meadow. Variety, colour. So we're going to look at two aspects. Bilingual, and this is very much a webinar kind of workshop, so we're going to be doing things, and plurilingual. So I'm defining bilingual, at least two languages are used by the teacher or teachers and learners in the class. And those two languages probably are going to be English and German in your context, German primarily. And the first example we'll look at is first in L1 and then in L2. And I did that already with that little story. And in that story, can you just write in the chat, who was talking and who was I talking to? Where were we? What were we talking about? And when do you think that happened? Do you think it was a real story? When do you think that happened? Just write in the chat what your gut feeling is about my story. Our child was taken to its mother. They're both in the car. That's interesting. That's interesting. But I was saying mum. So was I talking to a child? Or who thinks I might have been talking to someone else? Who, son or daughter, driving, mum, where, car? Okay, thank you very much. So the person who was driving, the person who was speaking was with their mum in the car, going to the hospital. It was raining outside. And when do you think this happened? Do you think it's... I'm going to tell you something. It's a true story. All right, I'm going to tell you. And I often do this with students because we like talking about current stories. So this happened yesterday. I was driving my mum, Beryl, who's 97 years old. Yes, 97, I was driving her to the hospital and there was a cloud burst, a storm, and the traffic stopped. And her hospital appointment was in 5 minutes. I had to change, and we managed to get there just 5 minutes late because I went over the hill on the back road to the hospital, driving through floods in the storm. So that's the true story. And yeah, so we're working with true stories, but we could also do the same thing with a folk tale, for example. You might tell a fable. You could tell a story that students already know very well, like the lion and the mouse, you know, with the hunter and the net. And you could tell that in German. And then afterwards, you could tell the story in English. And even if they're at a low level, they're getting the rhythm of English and the feeling, and they understand because you're using gesture and mime and expression and emotion in your storytelling. So when they listen again, they're not listening for the form of the story, they're getting the gist, and oh, it can boost confidence in not micro listening, but the macro experience of listening. That's right, Kirsten. It's faster turning left. We were stuck if I followed the main road. So that's one example of bilingual storytelling. Another example is the whole story is told in a combination of L1 and L2. Yeah, so instead of first English and then German, we might do a little bit in English, a little bit in German, a little bit in German, a little bit in English. We're switching back and forth. Let me show you an example of this kind of combination, which is fascinating. It's quite challenging for some people to do it. My friend Hend Qatar lives in Palestine, in Gaza. She's an Arabic teacher of English to children. And here's Hend. I'll let you introduce Hend with a few slides. I did a project called Around the World in 88 Tales, where I met with storytelling teachers in 44 different countries, and we exchanged stories. And some chose to include their own first languages. So these are some of the storytellers I met, and Hend Qatar was one of them. And we're going to listen to the beginning of the story that Hend told. The story is called Darwish, and Darwish is a foolish man who lives with his wife, Fahima. And at the beginning of the story, the wife says, "You need to sell the cow." So it's a familiar story beginning. Listen to the beginning of the story, just the first 2 minutes, and then we'll stop and you can imagine what happens next. So think about the story, but also afterwards, I'm going to ask you to reflect on the Arabic language. You're going to hear English and Arabic together. Maybe you're an Arabic user, but I'm imagining most of you are not. So what do you enjoy about the cadences, rhythms of Arabic when you listen to Hend? And you know what she's saying because she's switching back and forth. So let's play this first video clip. Oh, you're going to play your oud?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the oud. I prefer to call it oud. It's lute, yeah, in English.
Lute. It's like an Arabic lute. Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, so my story, درويش story. كان يا مكان في قديم الزمان وما يحلى الحكي إلا بذكر النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام. There was a farmer named Darwish, and he was simple and naive. بماعة الدجاجات وبسرق الريش. His wife Fahima was smart and patient, but would often get frustrated by his behavior. She realized one day that they needed more money to get by, so she asked her husband Darwish to take their only cow to the market and try sell it for 10 or 20 lira. حضرت هزاد والزوادة لزوجها الأهبل درويش وجابت له البقرة وأعطت إياها وقالت له روح بيع البقرة and come back before sunset. Do you understand? Poor Darwish had no choice but to go to the market with that cow, and he was singing happily on his way to the market without any reason. Ayazin, Ayazin, Ayazin العابدين يا ورد مفتح بين البساتين يا Darwish got tired on his way to the market, so he decided to stop under a tree to have some rest and to eat his lunch. He tied the cow to the tree وفرش منديل الزاد والزواد ولسه بيسمي بيقول بسم الله عشان ياكل. He heard a crow caw just above his head. اطلع فوق وقال أهلين يا غراب. What did you just say? I didn't hear you. You want to buy this calf from me? Now what do you think the crow replied? The crow replied رد الغراب وقال caw caw caw. I think you do it way better than me, David. Darwish looked again and he said, okay, do you have 20 lira to buy this calf from me? رد الغراب وقال okay, where's the money then? Buried under the tree? رد الغراب وقال So Darwish got up. He قام على حيله صار يفحر تحت الشجرة يفحر تحت الشجرة thinking that he would find money under the tree. بس ضلوا يفحر تحت الشجرة يفحر فجأة he found a big pot filled with golden lira. يا ترى يا درويش ايش حتعمل في هدول الذهبات؟ حتوديهم لزوجتك الغلبانة فهيمة؟
Okay, we're going to stop there. Brilliant. So he found the pot with golden money. The crow really did somehow pay Darwish for the cow. What do you think's going to happen in the rest of the story? Do you think that Darwish is going to be successful? Do you think he's going to get this money? Do you think his wife is going to... What do you think might happen? So you can think about that. You can write in the chat if you want to. But the other thing I'd like to ask you to do is to just comment on the experience of listening to two languages together. So as a German teacher of English, you might tell a story switching between German and English. Now, Hend is speaking very quickly, but we can adapt this to the level and the ability and the age of our students. But there's a wonderful, again, no focus on, no concern about not understanding because they're hearing the entire story in both languages. What could be the benefits of switching languages in this way? Of course, Claudia, without the English parts, it would have been difficult to understand the story. That's the whole premise here of mixed language storytelling. We're using the language we're competent in. So we're imagining we're English users, and then we're telling the story using the target language. Let's say it was Arabic in this case. And I deliberately used Arabic as a language you probably wouldn't understand, just to put yourself in the shoes of the students. You're hearing this new language being spoken. Mechtilt, I love the two languages mixed up, a fairy tale atmosphere. Yeah, I feel the same way. And it takes me into the story, the culture of the story as well. Now, the good news is you're not going to hear the end of this story today, but you might hear the end of the story today at the end, because at the end of today's webinar, I'm going to give you links. And one of those links is to the recording of Hend telling the whole of this story. It's a brilliant story, Darwish, and I learned this story from Hend, and I also tell this wonderful Arabic story from the Middle East. So that's an example of parallel two languages together, mixing them up. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that, Kristin. Okay, so another example, the whole story is in L1 and L2 combined. That's that, first language and target language. Another is moving from language 1 to language 2 over at least 2 tellings. And in this scenario, learners might also, if we opt to, learn and retell the story. So let's explore this one. Mixed language storytelling. This is a book by a very good friend of mine, very important teacher for me, Mario Involucri, who co-wrote the book Using Mother Tongue, Making the Most of the Learner's Language. So it's a Delta publication distributed by CLET, together with Sheila Della. And they say mixed language storytelling is among the most powerful mixed language techniques, because the text comes to the learner from you. So you're not listening to a recording. You, the teacher, are telling the story, switching between languages. Yeah, you're learning it from your voice, your gestures, your way of telling, your way of being. And all of this forms part of the relationship between you and your students, and close bonds can be formed through storytelling. So, I also included this technique in my book, published by Delta, Storytelling with Our Students, Techniques for Telling Tales from Around the World. And I include the story Rabbit and Jaguar, the story which comes from Guatemala and the south of Mexico, a story from Mayan culture. So in this webinar, I'm going to tell the story twice. The first time, I'm not going to finish the story. I'm going to ask you to guess the ending. But also, I'm going to, first time, use much more English, because I'm imagining that we're all users of English and we're learning Spanish, okay? We're learning Spanish, as we did earlier. And you will understand it's going to be very simple. And later in this session, I'm going to tell the story again, and you'll notice that I'm going to use much more Spanish. So we're slowly transferring from the English into the Spanish. And because folk tales have a lot of repetition, you'll find it not too difficult. So pay attention, learn some Spanish. Here we go. So could you put me into the big screen, please, Brigitte? And here we go with the story. So in Mayan culture, they tell many stories of Conejo, the rabbit. This is painted on amate paper from Mayan culture. The rabbit is fast, he's a trickster, and very clever. So here's the first telling. Please tell the story together with me. Get your hands free. Yes. I'll say story, story. You say tell us a story. Story, story. There was once an old man and an old woman. Érase una vez una pareja mayor, un hombre mayor, una mujer mayor. And all they had in the world was one rabbit and one jaguar. Jaguar, you know. And one day, Senor Jaguar came to the jaula, the cage, la jaula, where the conejo, the rabbit, lived. And Jaguar said, Senor Conejo, the old man and the old woman are boiling up a pan of hot water. They're going to cook you. They're going to eat you. They will give some to me. Oh, no, 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 said Rabbit. They're not going to cook me. No me van a cocinar. They're going to make hot chocolate, Jaguar. And if you come into my cage, si tú vienes en mi jaula, I will give my hot chocolate, mi chocolate caliente, to you. Chocolate caliente. Chocolate caliente. The Jaguar opened la jaula, the cage, and entró. And when the Jaguar was in the cage, with a hop and a skip, Conejo was out of the cage, out of the house, and into the forest. Salió de la jaula, salió de la casa, salió en el bosque. Well, the Jaguar waited. The Jaguar waited for the chocolate caliente. Can you say with me? He waited, and he waited, and he waited. And now in Spanish, esperó, Espero. Espero. Oh no, that rabbit tricked me. No hot chocolate. And the angry jaguar ran out of the cage, out of the house, and into the forest. Salió de la jaula, salió de la casa, salió en el bosque. And he looked, buscaba, for the conejo. ¿Dónde está el conejo? Al final vino a una montaña. He came to a mountain. And in la montaña había una cueva. There was a cave, una cueva. And in the cueva profunda, in the deep cave, jaguar saw conejo. Conejo, you tricked me. I'm going to catch you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to eat you. Te voy a coger. Te voy a matar. Te voy a comer. And in the cave, en la cueva, Conejo dijo, no. I didn't trick you. You're talking about another rabbit, not me. Señor Jaguar, si tú vienes en mi cueva, if you come into my cave, my house is falling down. I am weak. My paws are weak. Tengo las patas débiles, weak paws. But Jaguar, you are strong. Tú tienes las patas fuertes. You have strong paws. Jaguar, you can come in and hold up my house while I go and get a stick, un palo, to hold up my house. Huh? Jaguar said, I am strong. Yes, I am strong. And Jaguar came into the cueva and put his patas fuertes against the wall of the house, the cave. And de un salto, el conejo salió de la cueva, salió en el bosque, into the wood, into the forest. And Jaguar, can you put your paws, your strong paws, against the cave wall? Jaguar esperó, say it with me, esperó, esperó, esperó. ¿Dónde está el conejo con ese palo? Where's the rabbit with that stick? Espero. Oh no, rabbit has tricked me again. And the jaguar was furioso, furious. And the jaguar ran. Salió de la cueva, salió en el bosque, buscando el conejo. Where is the conejo? And in the end, he heard the rabbit was laughing. And he came and he saw the rabbit was bouncing, rebotando, hanging onto an elastic vine hanging from a tree. Una liana elástica. Boing, boing, laughing at how he had tricked the jaguar. And the jaguar looked and said, I'm going to catch that rabbit. I'm going to kill that rabbit. I'm going to eat that rabbit. Now, we're nearly at the end of the story. What do you think is going to happen at the end? So I'm asking you in L1, L2 is Spanish, L1 is English, so imagine. I'm asking my students in L1, what do you think is going to happen at the end of the story? You can write in the chat. Do you think the rabbit's going to the jaguar's going to get the rabbit? What's going to happen to the rabbit? The rabbit's bouncing on an elastic vine, laughing at how he tricked the jaguar. What's the rabbit going to do? How will this Mayan story finish? So you can write it in the chat what you think will happen at the end. Typically, I would get a couple of students to come up and tell us different endings to the story. But first, they might talk to each other in pairs. Now, who would we tell this story to? A story using 2 languages. Let me show you a tiny video clip. In the video clip, you're going to see some German children. They're about 10 years old. They've been learning English for about a year or maybe a year and a half. And they're in Hamburg in a school. And I'm just going to play the little bit where they're guessing the ending. And you'll notice I, of course, wasn't using Spanish. I was telling the story in English with some German to help them understand. But of course, when they made their guess about the end, they were using German. And I was translating their ideas into English in a way that was comprehensible and that they could subsequently remember and retell and also perhaps even write. So we're working from the mother language, the first language, into the second language. Let's just watch that tiny clip. What happened at the end of the story? Turn to your partner. So the jaguar jumped onto the rabbit and he killed him and he ate him.
Yes.
That's your ending.
Yes.
Oh, poor rabbit. Thank you very much. Wait. Who has the same ending? The selber. Yeah, so the jaguar ate the rabbit. Oh, yeah. This is a mouse.
Der Jaguar springt hoch, der Hase springt dann auch hoch und dann fällt der Jaguar runter und auf Giftfolie und dann muss er sich so kratzen und dann läuft er weg.
Giftfolie?
Giftpfeile oder Giftpfeile oder was man
Poisonous
something.
Ja.
Oder was?
Was giftiges Wort?
Brennnessel.
Nee.
Ja, diese Brennnessel.
There's some, what do you call them? Some plants, some...
Stinging nettles.
Yeah, stinging nettles, yes.
Oh! So the jaguar jumped, rabbit sprung up on the elastic vine, the jaguar landed in a stinging nettle, and it just sting. And the rabbit got away.
Okay.
Wow, I love it, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stinging nettles. Yes, could you write stinging nettles, somebody, into the chat? Oh my goodness. Poor rabbit in the poor jaguar landing in the stinging nettle. So we had two opposite endings. And maybe you noticed what was happening there, this kind of negotiating meaning. So we're working with the emergent language, with the language that the students want to express, and the teacher, well, the teacher and I, the visiting storyteller. I often do storytelling with learners of English in Germany and other countries. I can come to you if you like. They get, they work out together, and I could then recast, as a teacher, recast that into English, which they can remember and use. Thank you, Mechtil. Stinging nettle. Let's see your ideas. Martina, maybe the rabbit will ride on the jaguar like on a horse. I love that. That would be the amazing image. I love that image. And that would be exactly in keeping with the character of Conejo the trickster. Thank you so much for that. So now let's just reflect a moment. What was happening there? I was telling the story mostly in L1 English and using some translation into L2 of key words, sometimes repeating those. They came up frequently. I wonder if there's some Spanish words that were beginning to become familiar to you, words which might not have been familiar to you before you heard the story. Well, let's come back to that. We'll come back and do a second telling of Rabbit and Jaguar, and you will find out what happens at the end, I promise. I'm sure you're wondering. Okay, so let's come back now to the PowerPoint. Thanks, Brigitte. So I included in my book, Rabbit and Jaguar, preparation and first telling, second telling, third telling, and that will be part of the that will be there in the final slide, a link to how you can get that, which are these 2 pages from my book, Storytelling with Our Students, about mixed language storytelling. So we've moved from L1 to L2 over at least 2 tellings. Well, we'll have the second telling later. And then the last example there is story told in L2, so German learners learning English with instant translation of unknown key lexis. And that can usually be done by eliciting from learners what happens in the story. Okay, so if I was to tell a very simple story about I'll tell you a story I learned from a girl in Gaza in Palestine. She told me the story in English. It's very, very short. And sometimes I will stop and I'll check that you understand the meaning. And I'll ask you to say in German what I'm saying in English. So you'll translate it into German. And often there'll be one student in the class who knows the meaning. And so they give the meaning and then everybody understands. But we'll do it with, usually it's spoken, of course, but here let's do it written. So in the chat, could you write down the, well, you could write the German word, the German word. Okay. Yes, because you're learning English. That's right. So write down the German word when I ask you what something means. Okay, so this is a very short story. Mohammed and his friends were late for the train. And Mohammed and his friends were running along the platform. Oh, platform? How do you say platform in German? That's right. Bahnsteig. Bahnsteig. So everybody knows that word. Could you all say the word platform? Great. They were running along the platform and the train was moving away and they jumped onto the train. They made it, but as they jumped on, Mohammed lost one of his brand new leather shoes. New leather shoes. German? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can everybody say it? New leather shoes. That's right, leather. Wonderful. Very similar, isn't it? Oh, he lost one of his new leather shoes. It fell on the platform. Oh. Now, the train was going away along the platform and Mohammed quickly took off his other shoe and threw it through the window. So his second shoe landed on the platform. Yes. And his friend said, Mohammed, why did you throw your new leather shoe onto the platform? And Mohammed said, well, that shoe, it's no use to me. It's no use to me. How would you say that in German? It's no use to me. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, can everybody repeat? It's no use to me. It's no use to me. I only have one shoe. So I threw my new leather shoe onto the platform. Then maybe somebody will find the two shoes and they will find them useful. Useful. Ah, Mohammed's friends understood. Mohammed was kind. It's a lovely, simple story. I learned that from a child in Palestine about Mohammed and his new leather shoes. So that was that simple technique of telling the story in the target language, but getting instant translation. And of course, I, the teacher, could translate. But what I did is I stopped and I invited students, and some students might not know, but some students do know. We check and then we repeat the phrase together. Or it might be that the teacher says, I'm going to tell the story and stop me if you don't know a word. And then students say stop, and then the teacher gives or elicits the translation, and then continues. But of course, we don't want to stop the story for too long, so it's best done with a very short story. So that would be story told in L2 with instant translation of unknown key lexis. And maybe the students will remember after the story. What words will they remember, do you think? Yeah, they might remember platform, new leather shoe, maybe useful. So these are some ideas about mixed language storytelling. So we're not focusing particularly on grammar or lexis particularly. We're looking at the whole story and then maybe afterwards mining the story later for language. But it's all about the whole story, the meaning, the fluency, the joy, the emotion. Storytelling brings us together. Storytelling, we kind of tend to forget about the language we're interested in sharing the experience. So we've talked about bilingual storytelling. Now let's talk about plurilingual classroom storytelling, where at least 3 languages are used by teachers and learners in the class, different home languages. Plurilingual storytelling. This is dear friend Manuela Kelly Calzini, and it's an article that hasn't yet been published, but she shared it with me generously. And she says, plurilingual storytelling refers to the practice of incorporating multiple languages within storytelling to foster cultural exchange, celebrate linguistic diversity, and foster inclusive narratives. By seamlessly blending different languages, this approach offers a unique opportunity to bridge cultural gaps and promote a sense of unity among diverse communities. All about inclusion, celebrating diversity, bringing students together who come from different language heritages and backgrounds, who often are negotiating between different languages. So one example of this would be including story openings and key lexis from the language or languages where the story originates. So if I tell a story from Arabic, I might use that phrase that we heard Hind use in Arabic. Can you remember? She said, "Kanya makan fikadim zaman." Or if I'm telling a story from French, "Il était une fois." You know what I mean. And those other phrases that you gave us at the beginning of the chat, we might deliberately learn them and include them. If I'm telling a Japanese story, mukashi, mukashi, even just that word, those couple of words can take us into that culture. And it might be there are other phrases that are typical or meaningful to the story that we can use within the story to work with different languages and bridge that gap. Let me introduce you to Simona. She's quite small in this photograph. Simona is telling stories. She's an English teacher in Italy. And thank you very much, Mione, I agree. And Simona is wrote. I'm just going to read out something that she wrote about an experience she had when she was telling. She's a storytelling teacher of English. So when she told a story about Joha, or it's also called Nasreddin. Nasreddin is the Turkish name, or Joha in Arabic. Is a character who appears in many stories across the Middle East, all the way to Western China, all the way west to Morocco. And there are many, many stories that everybody knows who comes from those parts of the world. So she said, I was teaching a group of kids in their first year of middle school, 11 to 12 years old, at beginner's level. It was during lockdown. They were online. They were very mixed in their level of interest in the class, but a quiet class. In the group, there was one student who was always very quiet, who hadn't made much progress since the beginning of the year. He'd often do something else during the lesson instead of paying attention. He didn't seem to get along with the other students in the group. His name was Ahmed, and he was born and raised in Italy. His family were from Egypt. His home language, Arabic. In the program, I had a free lesson. I could choose to do whatever I wanted, so I chose storytelling, and in particular to focus on the story Borrowing the Pan, which she had learned during a course with me. During the lesson, I started talking about Nasruddin, Johar, as a character, and told them about the different names he's called in different parts of the world. And when I said the name Johar, something happened. Ahmed must have been doing something else during the lesson, maybe playing on the computer or chatting with his friends. When I said Johar, I saw his gaze raise and he unmuted. Do you know, in Egypt we have a cartoon about Johar and his adventures. And he went on to explain about the Arabic language cartoon, which we discovered having always been one of his favourite cartoons when he was growing up. And during that lesson, Ahmed paid attention and was very engaged. He even smiled. And at the end of the lesson, his classmates asked him more questions about the cartoon and Johar, which he was eager to answer. From that moment on, Ahmed didn't become the best student ever. There were always ups and downs, but he started paying more attention and speaking more with his classmates. I, Simona, realised how much he must have felt taken into account and special, having something that only he could share with the others. I saw the power of intercultural storytelling. So what Ahmed experienced in that moment, who'd known these stories in Arabic, from his home language, and when he visited Egypt, was now coming into the classroom and having that encounter. Oh, and I'm hearing that in English, or it could be in German. So that kind of inclusion can happen in that simple way, from just telling a story about a character and including a phrase. Another example of plurilingual: learners use the languages they know to learn, tell, and retell and respond to stories. So I often work with mixed language groups. There's some children online from Serbia, Croatia, Nepal, and Palestine. When I've taught adult groups, they've been from many different parts of the world. And these are people I've learned stories from Angola and Malaysia, Libya, Turkey, Guatemala, and Nepal. Yes, I'm very fortunate in my English language teaching experience. Bringing different languages into the classroom. So what I often ask students to do is to learn a story. So first of all, I might tell them a simple story, like a Muhammad story, for example, or Rabbit and Jaguar, and they learn the story in English. And then they tell the story in English a few times in the class with different partners. They go out of the classroom, tell it again. Maybe they they practice and put a recording on a Padlet and they share it with other members of the class and with their teacher, and I give them feedback about pronunciation, about grammar, and then they come back into the classroom, do it again. They might do that with a couple of different stories, getting confident as storytellers. And then maybe I would ask them to choose a story. I might give them a selection of maybe simple fables, Aesop's fables, and they choose one that they like and they practice it and bring it in, and different students tell different stories. But the next step is over to you. You students can choose a story. Why don't you choose a story from your own heritage? Now, if you've got majority German heritage, lots of students might choose stories that they've heard in German when they were younger. But when you've got students from different parts of the world, well, often many of our students from migrant heritages come from cultures where there's a very strong oral storytelling tradition. So they might tell a story they learned in Syria, for example, or in Nigeria, and they can bring that story from there. And if they don't know the story, they might learn a story from their family member or community member, and they can learn it, and they're working from their first heritage language into English, or it could even be into German. So here we're going deeper into this plurilingual classroom and welcoming different cultures into the space. This is Kenza, and I'm going to go back again because before I show you that slide, I'm going to show you a video. And it's Kenza is telling a story, first in Arabic, and then she's translating it into English. And afterwards, I'm going to listen and I'm going to help her to put it into even better English. Let's watch the third video clip.
ومرة أخرى كنت أريد أن أقول إن الفجار لفي جحيم، فخطأت وقلت إن التاجر لفي جحيم. ففهموا الرجلان ماذا كان يقول جوحة، فطوال الطريق صمتوا. And this is the story in version of Arabic. Then I tell the story in the version of English. So one day, Juha was traveling with a judge and a merchant. When they started chasing him for his navy in speaking, the judge boasted of his knowledge and position and saying, he was talk too much, makes many mistakes. The merchant then asked to Juha, Juha, have you ever said something wrong? Juha answered them and saying, yes, I have often made a mistakes in speaking. So once I wanted to say two judges in hell, but then I said one judge in hell. Another time I want to say sinners are in hell, but I said merchant in hell. The man then understood Juha's joke and apologized to him, not speaking for the rest of the journey, and continued the traveling with Juha. Thank you.
But you might have guessed that Kenza is actually lives in Italy, and she's grown up in Italy, but she comes from Moroccan heritage. So she's telling a story first in Moroccan Arabic as she learned it from her grandmother. So she'd learned the story in Arabic from her grandmother, then she had worked the story into English and also Italian. So using both of those languages. I think she first went into Italian and then into English, and then was working on her pronunciation and accuracy in English when she was trying to retell it. And that was part of a process. And then I retold the story to her, and I told her the story something like this. Juha was walking along with a judge and a merchant, and they were laughing at the way Juha spoke English, spoke in such a simple way, such a naive way. And they said to him, Juha, don't you ever make mistakes when you're talking so much? And Juha said, yes, sometimes I make mistakes. I remember one time I said, to hell with two judges, when I meant to say, to hell with the judge. And another time I said, to hell with sinners. And what I really meant to say was, to hell with merchants. The two others now understood Juha's joke, and they walked along with him in silence from that moment on. So I think that was the story as I told it back to Kenza, who then thanked me and continued to work on how she would tell the story. So if you look at the next slide, she wrote to me in a message via her coach, and it's the same woman who coaching her, Manuela Kelly Calzini in Italy. Hello, good morning, Mr. Heathfield. Thank you for the various compliments you gave me. The Arabic's my first language, my native language since I was little. I speak it, write it, and I can express myself using Arabic. All my stories are initially Arabic because they're told to me by my grandmother, and I then translate them into English, but also Italian for the book. Yes, she's writing a book of stories she's learned from her grandmother and mother. to translate them. I do it myself initially, and if I can't translate something, I search on the internet. It's a process a bit complicated. I'm glad you liked the second story I told. How you repeated it, it's right, you didn't do it wrong. I'm not reading the stories anymore, but I learned them to repeat them at the World Storytelling Cafe to help my English. Thanks again. So she's getting a real sense of not just learning English, but it's this kind of mixed language, bringing her culture into play. So here we're really talking about not just plurilingual classroom, but also translanguaging, which is a term you might have come across. The act performed by bilinguals of accessing different languages in order to maximize communicative potential. And translanguage is a big buzzword in the language learning world at the moment, bringing all the languages into play. So students can really be themselves wholly when in the classroom we accept all the languages they bring. And Dr. Naziha Ali Raza went to a session she did at the conference a couple of weeks ago in Harrogate, said translanguaging validates what learners bring to the classroom and creates a sense of belonging. I wrote a chapter together with Ala Göksu. Ala Göksu, our chapter was called Storytelling for Diverse Voices in the British Council book, Creating an Inclusive School Environment. And Ala Göksu, there she is with the flowers among her students, says, and she's from Ukraine and teaches English in Hanover in Germany. And I've worked a lot with Ala. Using storytelling, teachers create a safe learning environment that benefits all pupils, including those whose home language differs from the language of schooling. And I think Kenzo illustrates that very well. And another German person is Irmgard Kleinkamp, who's a senior teacher trainer in Hamburg at the the Landes Institute. Students from migrant heritages retrieve their cultural knowledge and have a too rare opportunity of contributing their valuable knowledge in the classroom. They gain motivation, confidence. They don't forget about past experience. Multicultural storytelling has a great impact on their multilingualism. So you can't separate the culture and the language. Sharing stories from diverse heritages helps to create a more inclusive school environment. Seems to be a feeling of unity amongst listeners, as well as an open mind to learn something new. Thank you for your comment. I'm going to read your comment in a minute, Joachim, but I'm realizing that time is going on, and I'm going to just round off by coming back to the story of Rabbit and Jaguar. But before I do that, there's a quote from Harry Kucher, who's the former president of the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. To achieve global understanding and citizenship, we need to encourage our students to be firmly rooted in their cultures while opening up to the rest of the world, and storytelling's an essential tool in this. So we've looked at these different forms, but what I want to go back to now is Rabbit and Jaguar. So if you can make me big one more time, and I hope you can bear with me, everybody. There's lots of links on the final slide, so it's worth staying till the end. But notice how much more Spanish you understand when you hear it a second time. If you're a learner of Spanish or a beginner with Spanish, notice if you remember. I'm going to just give you a challenge. Can anyone remember the meaning of the word jaula? You can write it in German or in English in the chat. Jaula. Ah, Martina said Käfig. Yes, that's right. The cage, Käfig, jaula. Can anyone remember the meaning of bosque? Bosque. Goodbye, Mechthild. Wald, yes. And anyone remember the meaning of quaver? Quaver. Hurler, yes. Yes, fantastic. So, here's the story. Había una vez una pareja mayor, una señora mayor, un hombre mayor, y no tenían más en el mundo que un conejo y un jaguar. They only had a rabbit and a jaguar. And one día, jaguar came to the jaula where the conejo lived. Señor Conejo, The old man, la pareja mayor están preparando agua caliente. Te van a cocer, te van a comer, van a compartirte conmigo. They're going to give some to me when they've cooked you. No, 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 said Rabbit. No, 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 they're not going to cook me. They're boiling up hot water to make hot chocolate. Van a hacer chocolate caliente. Y si tú entras en mi jaula, Jaguar, yo te doy mi chocolate caliente. You can enjoy my hot chocolate. Hot chocolate. And the jaguar came into the cage with a hop and a skip. Conejo was fuera de la jaula, salió de la casa en el bosque. Jaguar esperó y esperó y esperó. ¿Dónde está mi chocolate caliente? Esperó, esperó. Oh no, ese conejo me ha engañado. Rabbit tricked me. The angry jaguar ran out of the... Salió de la jaula, salió de la casa, salió en el bosque. Estaba buscando. Y al final vino a una montaña. En la montaña había una cueva. En la cueva profunda vio el conejo. Oh, tu conejo. I'm going to catch you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to eat you. Te voy a coger, te voy a matar, te voy a comer. No, 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 dijo conejo. Estás hablando de otro conejo. Yo no, no. Another rabbit. Pero tú. Jaguar, tú eres fuerte. Tú tenías las patas muy fuertes. You've got really strong paws. Yo soy débil. I'm weak. Mi casa va a caer. My house is going to fall down. Si tú entras en mi casa, tú puedes poner tus patas fuertes contra la pared y yo voy a coger un palo. I'm going to get a stick while you hold up my house. I am strong. Soy fuerte, dijo Jaguar, y entró en la cueva y puso sus patas fuertes contra la pared. Y de un salto, boing, boing, el conejo salió de la cueva en el bosque. Esperó y esperó. ¿Dónde está ese conejo con el palo? Where's the rabbit with the stick? Esperó y esperó. Oh, ese conejo me ha engañado, tricked me. Oh, furioso. Jaguar salió de la cueva, salió en el bosque, buscando el conejo. Al final, oyó al conejo rebotando en una liana elástica. He was bouncing on an elastic vine hanging from a tall tree, laughing at how he tricked the jaguar. Voy a coger ese conejo. Voy a matar ese conejo. Voy a comer ese conejo. What do you think happened at the end? Jaguar jumped and caught the rabbit and pushed the rabbit down to the ground on the elastic vine. Ahora te voy a matar. Te voy a comer. But rabbit wriggled, no, wriggled, and pop, through the paws of Jaguar came the rabbit. And the rabbit on the elastic vine flew up higher and higher and higher and higher, arriba, 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 hasta llegar en la luna. The rabbit landed in the moon. They say in Mayan culture that when the moon is full and round, you can see rabbit. Can you see his ears? And his head. You can see rabbit in the moon laughing at how he tricked the jaguar. And jaguar is still waiting for that rabbit to come down. So there's a Mayan story for you. Yes, I'm a storyteller, but we teachers, we can all be wonderful storytellers. So tell stories in English and tell stories using mixed languages, and bring in your students' languages as well so they can experience that delight. Can we go to the final? I'm just going to go to the end of the PowerPoint now. I'm realizing time has overrun a tiny bit, so I'll just bring you to the closing slides. I do courses called CREST, Creative and Engaging Storytelling for Teachers. My next course begins on the 3rd of June. If you'd like to find out more, get in touch. There's a link on the last page. This is Sahar Sayam from Palestine, who did the course with me. Many German teachers have done courses, and her student Tala, and Sahar wrote, "This course was the shifting point through my journey. Building my self-esteem to tell stories and then coaching others to tell stories wouldn't be achieved without being part of this course." So Sahar coached her students and they came and taught me stories as part of a project. But coaching your students to become storytellers, fantastic for self-esteem, fantastic way to improve fluency, confidence. And you can listen to Tala telling a fabulous story, which I learned from her, one of the links on the final slide. And Manuela, let's recognize and harness the power of plurilingual storytelling to create a more inclusive and interconnected world. That's just what I would like to say myself. My wife and I run coaching online and homestay. If you want to find out more, get in touch. And there's lots of links on this final slide. And there's a handout. You can get the handout by downloading it, but it's also there. I put a QR code, but it's also here as a download. So there are 3 books, all in the Delta series: Storytelling with Students and Spontaneous Speaking, which I wrote, Using Mother Tongue by Sheila Della and Mario Rimbalucri. There are articles for the love of stories, which I quoted from for Harry Kucha Kucha. Creating an Inclusive School Environment, which I wrote with Ala Göksu in Hanover. There's the project Around the World in 88 Tales. You can listen to the whole of Hen's story in English and Arabic. And the whole playlist is at the next link. Tala Yusuf telling the story of Ashap and the 3 friends. Fantastic. And then Rabbit and Jaguar mixed language storytelling. So you can get those pages from the book, but better to buy the book. And then you've got an audio recording. You've got a written transcription of my audio recording, written in a beautiful design, and it's all free. And Rabbit and Jaguar told by David with Hamburg school children. You can listen to that as well if you're interested. And then at the end, the quote from Ophelia Garcia about translanguaging, and my website, websites, email address, and also my YouTube channel. So I'm interested to know about questions you might have, and do get in touch. Thank you again, Brigitte, for inviting me to do another one of my webinars. Sorry, this was a bit longer than usual. We're going to be running this one again in October. So if you enjoyed it, please recommend it to your colleagues. And if you didn't enjoy it, recommend it to your enemies.